Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1993 horror comedy, My Boyfriend's Back. Now, before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on this film, I want to give a special shout out to Brock for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to my PayPal. The link will be in the video description down below, and I'll try to get to it as soon as I possibly can. Now, My Boyfriend's Back is one of those films that I definitely do have some nostalgia for because I first saw it when I was really young on TV. I think it might have been the Disney Channel. And it was one of those movies where it left an impression on me enough for me to remember it, but not like the entire movie or even the title of the film. So all I remembered was there was a zombie who wore plaid, and there was a scene with a girl with pigtails. And this made this movie one of those things where I spent years trying to remember, let alone find this film. And I kept searching. This is long before IMDb. This is long before the internet as we know it now. So it's a lot harder to find things based off your fuzzy memories from when you were a kid. So all I had was zombie wearing plaid, maybe he was a teenager, and girl with pigtails. So I crossed off a bunch of zombie movies, and most of them were not the right fit. I even went for like, okay, dead men don't wear plaid. No, that's a Steve Martin movie, and there's, as far as I know and as far as I remember, there aren't any zombies in it. And then I found a movie called I Was a Teenage Zombie, and I was like, oh, maybe this is it. But no, it had a teenager, and the teen was a zombie, but it was not at all what I remember watching. So I gave up until I randomly came across My Boyfriend's Back with this exact cover art on DVD at a thrift store, and I blind bought the DVD because I was like, "Hey, this could be fun." I like Traci Lind. I liked her in Fright Night Part 2, and it has a teenager and he's a zombie. Maybe this is the movie that I'm looking for, and even if it's not, could be a fun watch. And then I finally sat down and watched it, and then it was a moment of pure catharsis for me because as soon as the sequence started playing that featured Johnny wearing his plaid shirt, that's when things started to click. And then I knew for sure that this was the movie when I saw the dream scene with Traci Lind's character when she's got the pigtails and everything. And I was like, oh my God, I finally found this film. And it was a really great feeling. So it's a movie that I definitely do have some legitimate nostalgia for, but it's not what I would call a great film. It's one of those movies where it's entertaining, it's enjoyable enough, but it's definitely rather flawed. It's kind of lame, and I can understand why a lot of critics at the time were not very impressed with the movie. But at the same time, I don't think it's as bad as its critical reputation suggests. And I really do honestly understand the cult following that it started to receive over the years because of the fact that it's really a fun little horror comedy for the family in the same vein as stuff like My Best Friend's a Vampire, My Mom's a Werewolf, or Teen Wolf, or those kind of movies. And I think if you look at it in comparison to some of those films or that kind of horror movie, I think you could definitely get some enjoyment out of this movie. And I think it definitely has a certain charm to it. But the thing is, it does have this very sitcom-y, very TGIF, boy meets world kind of vibe to it. And considering the subject matter and the fact that it's dealing with zombies and all this other stuff, it does kind of feel like it's too tame. And as a result, it is a little lame. I gotta be perfectly honest here. But it's a relatively short film. It doesn't really overstay its welcome. And yeah, it is stiff at times, but it's fluid enough that it doesn't really necessarily feel like it's DOA, like it's dead on arrival. It's directed by Bob Balaban, and I will say that there are some shots in this from Bob that are really impressive, like the shot of the grave of Johnny, where the camera is positioned down in the ground and it's looking up at Johnny's parents as they're saying their goodbyes. That's a really great looking shot. But there's a lot of other shots in this film that aren't really that impressive, that are very standard, very play it safe, very bland, and pretty boring, to be honest, in terms of the shot selection, the camera techniques that are employed, the camera angles, zooms, the pans, the overall movement of the camera. It makes it look stiff. It makes it look stodgy. It makes it look like a TV movie. And if I'm judging it on those merits, which to be honest, I think I did see it on a TV network when I was a kid, then it's pretty good for a TV movie. Like if this actually was a Disney Channel original movie, okay, or made for ABC, all right, but it's not. It was a film that was made for theaters. And when you look at it and you really inspect it under those parameters, the direction really doesn't hold up. Now, I know at one point Peter Jackson was actually considered to direct this movie, but he wasn't interested. And honestly, I can see why. It's not really something that ties into his particular tastes or his preferences when it comes to a film of this type. Maybe if it was more gonzo, wild, crazy, full of carnage and all kinds of chaos, and it was like a love story version of Dead Alive, then maybe he might have been more intrigued by it and maybe he might have done it. And honestly, I think the film could have been a hell of a lot better if he did, but it wasn't meant to be. So Bob Balaban was brought on board, and it's just one of those things where I don't really think necessarily he was the best option. Yes, he directed Parents before this, but I would say Parents is honestly better than this movie because Parents, it at least is able to do a little bit more when it comes to its dark humor because it's not limited as much by the studio. This, though, definitely has a very Disney, very Touchstone Pictures shackle attached to it. So it's one of those things where it's got these shackles tied to around its legs and it can't really do much but shamble around, which is kind of fitting since it's a zombie movie, but it's not very good for the overall potential that the film has. I know Adam Marcus was a co-producer of the film, even though he's not listed. I think because he took himself off the credits because he wasn't happy with what the studio did to uh, the film. He would have been a good choice. Would have been cool to see what he might have done because he did a great job with Jason Goes to Hell. But yeah, it's just one of those things where they got Bob Balaban, I think probably because he was an easy get because he was just starting out directing films. He did one other movie before My Boyfriend's Back, and he was probably maybe on the books, and they were like, all right, hey Bob, do you want to do this movie? He's like, yeah, sure. And then, the rest is history. It's very just workmanlike, just okay, mediocre, job well done type of direction. Not anything that's super dynamic or amazing or Oscar worthy or anything of that caliber. And I get it, it's a cheeky horror comedy, but it's still one of those things where I feel that there's a lot of missed opportunities here, and one of them is definitely when it comes to the film's director. And speaking of missed opportunities, that leads me to the film script by Dean Lowery. Now, the script was initially, from what I remember reading and hearing, and this could be something that is completely inaccurate, so if somebody wants to correct me in the comments, feel free to do so. From what I remember hearing, the original script was different when it comes to the film's tone. It was closer to something along the lines of Return of the Living Dead Part 3. It was a more dark, edgy, gory, gutsy kind of script. And it definitely wasn't a PG-13, sanitized, toothless kind of zombie movie. And it was even titled something else. It was called Johnny Zombie, which is a much better title. I mean, My Boyfriend's Back is a lame title. Even not really the director, but the film star Andrew Lowery, even he felt the title sucked. He thought the original title was much better, and he's right. Disney only decided to change the title of the movie because My Boyfriend's Back was a well-known enough classic song, and they thought that that might lead to more people seeing the movie, and then they could use the song in the film's advertising, and that would lead to the film doing better in the box office. Definitely didn't work because the film cost 10 million and only made 3 million. So that was a fail. So that was completely unnecessary in terms of changing the film's title. And the marketing was a fail, period, because they really focused on the horror elements, and there's barely much of anything horror related in this horror comedy. And that's a big reason why this is a letdown when it comes to the script. When I'm looking back at it with fresh eyes and a different perspective that isn't just, let's just say, influenced by nostalgia. It's one of those things where it's a horror comedy, but the horror elements are very lame. They really are. Like, I've seen scarier episodes of Goosebumps, the what was it, The Haunting Hour, uh even Goosebumps knockoffs, definitely Are You Afraid of the Dark on Nickelodeon. Like, I've seen a lot of much scarier, much more tense episodes of children's entertainment than what's present in this film's script. And if it really is accurate and true that the original script was something that had more clear defined horror elements, then that's a real shame that the script was essentially butchered by Disney. And it seems like Disney was just the wrong company, period, to be adapting this script and this concept, because they want it their way. It has to fit under their banner and their parameters. And there are certain things that they aren't really uh, okay with, and they're not willing to let certain things slide. And so you get something that's very tame and very lame at times. The horror elements are barely present. There are a few moments where Johnny as a zombie maybe loses a few body parts, like an ear falls off. There's a dream scene where his dick and balls fall off, but there's a cartoon sound effect. So, it's not like it's The Fly with Jeff Goldblum. And I don't think it necessarily had to be, because that would have been the wrong tone for this film too. But it would have just been nice to find some balance, find some semblance of legitimate horror in this horror comedy. Because this is like 98% comedy and maybe 2% horror. And it doesn't help either that in this screenplay, the comedy is mostly just DOA. It's mostly dead on arrival. The jokes flatline. There are a few moments where there are some lines that are deadpan and are clever enough that it might make you chuckle or smirk. In particular, there's some bits with Johnny and his parents where Johnny's parents are just so ready and willing to help him out that they take a kid from a supermarket and leave him in the kitchen for a quick bite to eat, that kind of stuff. There's also some moments where characters are talking about things with a straight face and saying just absurd lines of dialogue. And because they're playing it straight, it definitely can lead to some good laughs. But then there's attempts to try to be, let's just say, a little bit more risque, like the dream scene where Johnny is trying to score with Missy in a gymnasium, and they're making jokes about how his penis isn't regulation sized, and that whole scene just comes across super lame because it's too tame. Feels like something you would see on TGIF back in the day. Like, what is this, Boy Meets World? Is this one of those shows? Like, it really does get a bit jarring at times when it comes to just how just overly sanitized and censored a lot of the film's attempts at humor or horror are. And there are some times where the campiness, the tongue-in-cheek aspect of the script, the corny elements are charming. I will give the script this. There are some really charming moments. I think the love story between Missy and Johnny is actually rather sweet, and I think that's definitely the heart of the film, and that definitely is some of the best elements of the film's script. You really do learn to like these characters and their interactions with one another. You want them to fall in love and you want them to stay in love. You want Johnny to find a way to either cure his zombie affliction or come back from the dead, but not as a zombie and just as his normal self, so they can live happily ever after. You want to see that because they're a cute couple and there's a lot of just sincere sweetness when it comes to the way that those two are written. But then there's other stuff like with Missy's dad, which is your typical, he's stern and he's hard and he doesn't like Johnny and he doesn't understand why she doesn't want to be with Buck the jock. But then he changes his mind later on because he realizes how much Missy really does legitimately like Johnny. And then he learns to like Johnny himself because he gets to know him a little bit. And then he says lines like, "Oh, I wish I got to know you more when you were still alive." Or actually, no, that's a line that's said by Missy at Johnny's funeral. But it's that same kind of sentiment. And then you have some stuff going on with this father of the school bully, Chuck. He's called Big Chuck, and he wants to kill Johnny. He wants to hang him. He wants to burn him because he ate his boy. And I don't think he's a very strong antagonist. I think a lot of the writing with that character is very one note and boring. You have this mad scientist guy who's trying to create a cure for Johnny, but then he realizes that he can make a lot of money off of the serum once he does create it out of nowhere because he's some brilliant scientist, and he creates this serum that can cure his zombie affliction and essentially, let's just say, rejuvenate dead skin or old skin. And he has a colleague that tells him that you can make a lot of money and you can market it as plastic surgery without the surgery. And so then he turns on Johnny and then tries to kill him again. I would have liked to have seen just more of that mad scientist guy and flesh his character out more and make him more of an antagonist than Big Chuck or Buck, the school jock, the guy who's right in the middle between Johnny and Missy. Like, have him be more of a main antagonist and a presence in the film script instead of Big Chuck. Have Buck be the main antagonist. It makes sense. Then when you have scenes where Johnny's friend is saying, "Oh, here's the perfect plan. Eat Buck." You know, it'd be perfect. You eat Buck, and then you can go out and go to the prom with Missy, because Buck will be dead. But no, they don't really flesh Buck out that much. They don't really make him the main antagonist. And that's definitely an element of the script that feels very lacking. But there are some charming moments, there are some chuckles. The character of Johnny Dingle is likable enough. You definitely do sympathize with him. You do feel for him because even though he's a total dweeb, there is a certain aspect to his character that is very endearing and very likable. So you do root for him and you do want him to get the girl. But he lacks like a really good antagonist to really be a barrier or some sort of challenge between him and Missy. And I definitely do feel that's something that's missing from this script, among other things. But yeah, it's just one of those scripts where it does feel like it doesn't have nearly as much brains as it could, even though it does have some moments of satire where it tries to satirize the zombie genre or teen comedies, but other films have done it better, or other movies took similar subject matter and then did more with them. Like, I personally feel Warm Bodies did a lot more with all of this and this concept than this movie, but that's just me. And the romance is sweet and cute, and there are some moments where you definitely do at least feel some sense of tension when it comes to Johnny being able to go to prom with Missy. But I don't think that's enough tension to really carry an entire story, an entire film. And by the time you get to the end where he dies the second time at the prom, and then he just conveniently comes back because he got to heaven, and then the guy behind the pearly gates is like, "Hey, I made a mistake. That you weren't supposed to die, so here's a do-over." And then the do-over goes wrong, but still goes right. And then Johnny still gets the girl. So it's still satisfying. It's not like a bleak ending, which I definitely wouldn't not have liked or preferred in any capacity. But it's still it's just one of those things where this script, it feels like a missed opportunity. You have a good idea, you have some clever concepts that just aren't fully utilized, and it does feel like a waste of certain parts, like the whole narration. Like, I really like the narration with Johnny, and I think it does a good job really putting you in his shoes and showcasing his perspective and what he's going through before he was a zombie and when he was a zombie. And I like the comic book aspects and approach that the script has, but it's too tame, and as a result it makes things honestly pretty lame. Like some of the dream sequences are really bad. Like the scene with Big Chuck and how he's roasting Johnny because he's not eating him well enough. Like, you call that eating? That's nothing. And it's just done in a way that's very just TGIF, sitcom, step by step kind of humor. And that just doesn't really appeal to me and doesn't really work. And it's something I was able to like give more of a pass to when I first saw the film, but when you rewatch it, it really is something that sticks out like a sore thumb or a dead thumb in in the context of this video. Yeah, I got to be honest, it is a film that has kind of gone a bit stale. I'm not going to say that it's a bad movie and I don't like it because I do. I do enjoy the film, but more as a time waster than really something that I would watch over and over again or something that I would consider one of my favorites. And really, it comes down to the script. It's not necessarily the casting. I mean, Andrew Lowery, I don't believe him as a teenager. I think he definitely looks way older. He's one of those guys who does not look like he's in high school. He looks like he's definitely in the middle of college. But he's got a good enough teen energy to him when it comes to his performance. It's a lively enough performance. It's just one of those things where you just don't buy him as a teenager when it comes to his looks and the way that he carries himself necessarily all the time. But there's other moments where you can kind of buy it. You know, he gives me vibes of like the lost member of Kids in the Hall. Like he kind of gives off those sort of vibes. Um, so that's honestly pretty fitting because there are sketches that Kids in the Hall have done where I think they played or supposedly are playing younger characters. So you kind of get that vibe here with Andrew Lowery. Traci Lind, though, I would say is definitely the biggest standout because not only is she drop dead gorgeous in this, but she's very charismatic. She really does the most that she can with the admittedly campy material. I think she gets the most out of Andrew Lowery when it comes to the scenes between the two because they really do connect with each other pretty well. She bounces off him in a rather pleasing way, and that really does help ease up some of the moments where Andrew Lowery just feels like he's just kind of trying a bit too hard or to be hip or not necessarily hip, but trying a little bit too hard to be juvenile or younger than he actually is. And there are other moments where he's trying to be funny and that just comes across as rather awkward and kind of cringe. And so when you have those scenes with her and Andrew, that really does help the movie immensely. And it helps Andrew a lot because now he's not trying to carry everything by himself. And I think Andrew is honestly better when he's doing the narration, which is interesting. When he's doing the narration as Johnny over the comic book panels, I get more authentic feelings from his character. But then when he's doing it on camera, it's really not necessarily on the same level. Danny Zorn plays his friend Eddie, just there. Didn't really, I don't really have a whole lot to say about Danny Zorn's performance, except it was, you know, okay. And I bought that he was friends with Johnny, with Andrew, but I didn't really buy that they were like inseparable or anything. Uh, Edward Herrmann, I would say he was maybe one of the other standouts, along with Mary Beth Hurt, who played Mr. and Miss Dingle. Uh, they had a good rapport with one another. Their deadpan was arguably probably the funniest when it comes to anyone in the cast. J.O. Sanders, he plays Sheriff McCloud, Missy's dad. he's one of those fathers who's also a cop. He's the town sheriff, and he's really hard on Johnny initially, and he even sides with the townspeople in terms of them hanging him or killing him again until Missy stands up for him. And then he changes his mind and he realizes Johnny's not that bad of a guy and he wishes he got to know him when he was still alive, and so on and so forth. So he's this guy with this tough exterior, and he's a sheriff, but he's got a heart of gold kind of thing. And it was fine. It was honestly nice to see J.O. Sanders kind of really, not kind of, really play this kind of role, because he's known for playing a lot of just jackass, just unlikable jerk characters. So it's nice to see him play a role where it seems like it might be going into that direction, but then he softens up and he shows some heart, and he's not a heartless bastard. Um, you also have Matthew Fox, who plays Buck, the jock, and he does a great job playing an asshole. Like, I hated this character. I wanted to knock his block off. So did a good job with the casting there, because he definitely has that jock look, and he really nails just that cocky, just asshole aspect that a lot of these jocks had, and in a lot of ways still do in high school. Philip Seymour Hoffman, in like his first ever role, plays Chuck, the bully who got eaten by Johnny, and even that casting doesn't necessarily elevate this film to amazing status, because you would think like, oh, Philip Seymour Hoffman, what a talented actor, but like this is his first ever role, so, and it's just playing a bully. There's really not much he could do with this. It's interesting to see him play this kind of role, and he does a good enough job playing an unlikable jackass, but that's about it. Paul Dooley, he's in his big Chuck. They try to really prop him up in this as like this major villain, but I never bought it, and it didn't help either that they really. It's just one of those things where they had him provide a lot of dialogue and a lot of moments that I think were supposed to be funny, but just didn't really come across that way. They just came across as rather cringe, like the whole dream scene where he's telling Johnny that, oh, you call that eating? That's nothing. It's just one of those things where it's just very dad joke esque. So I think it's really honestly not necessarily Paul Dooley's fault. It's what he's working with. You also have Austin Pendleton as Dr. Bronson. I enjoyed his mad scientist take on that character. He was a lot of fun. Cloris Leachman plays the zombie expert. She's called the zombie expert because her husband was a zombie years prior. And it's fun to see Cloris Leachman in this, but it's a very small role. You also have Matthew McConaughey, who plays just a random guy in one scene. I think his first film role. And it's also the first film role for Renee Zellweger. And I guess it's not necessarily the first film role for Philip Seymour Hoffman, but it's one of his first film roles. It's actually the first film role for Matthew Fox. But yeah, I mean the cast is fine, but it just feels like, I know Matthew McConaughey wasn't, and Renee Zellweger had her scenes cut. I mean, Matthew McConaughey was in it, but not for barely any screen time at all. But it's just one of those things where it's like, maybe it would have been nice to have more of some of these younger actors, have them do a little bit more, maybe have a little bit more scenes involving Buck or something along those lines than what they were working with. Because he seemed like a good rival for Johnny, but they switched and went more for Chuck being more of a rival. And by Chuck I mean Big Chuck, Chuck's father. And I don't really feel that was necessarily the best choice, because it makes more sense that Buck would be more of a rival than Chuck's dad, because Buck was the one that was standing directly in the way of Johnny being with Missy. And one other actor I want to mention is Bob Dishy, who played the Gravedigger. He's been in a lot of stuff. Uh, he played the role well. Definitely played the role very tongue in cheek, but that's really the tone of the film, so it definitely did fit when it comes to his performance. The film features some technical elements that are just kind of there, run of the mill, average. The cinematography by Mac Alberg, or the editing by Michael Jablow. The music by Harry Manfredini is honestly not that good, and I like his work at times. He's kind of a hit and miss composer for me, and the score here, I felt it was very on the nose, and too much so. Like, it was too cheeky, too campy, too self-aware in terms of the tone of the film, to the point where it felt like it was just going overboard. It was going overboard with the campiness in certain scenes in terms of the score, and I really felt it was kind of distracting at times. It didn't necessarily help some of the scenes. Like, it's just trying too hard to be zany or goofy, and I get it as a cartoonish, silly kind of movie in terms of its tone, but it didn't need a score that was just amping all of that up, because it's a movie that has enough of that as it is. Honestly, the best music is some of the songs that were used for the soundtrack. Like, not necessarily anything that Harry Manfredini did. I would say, in particular, the song that played the prom. Like that one stands out the most for me. Hanging On for Dear Life by MMC. Um, but yeah, definitely not the best music either. But it's a film that runs for like 84 minutes, and that's with the end credits. You take out the end credits and it's even shorter. So it's one of those movies where, it's fun little diversion. But anyway, I got nothing else to say except thanks for watching my review of My Boyfriend's Back. And until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.